Good evening and welcome to our third public workshop for the city's evaluation and appraisal report. We're happy that you're here to participate with us this evening. As a little bit of housekeeping, I'd like to identify some of the folks here so that you know who they are in our meeting. We do have a member of our local planning agency here. Could you just raise your hand? The local planning agency member. And we also have one of our council members here, Bill Lockhart. Just so you all are aware, zoning board members. We have two zoning board members. Could you please raise your hand? Thank you. So to give you all a heads up, these folks are members of boards that operate within the sunshine. They're going to be participating this evening, but please understand that they may not have public comments or other comments. They may reserve those for their regular scheduled meetings. Thank you for being here this evening. We also wanted to let you know that this is our final public workshop. We are still collecting comments that you can provide on the rear counter over there with the sign-in sheets. You can fill out comment cards and still provide comments. You can still email us here at the city with your comments as well as we continue the process. We will be receiving a draft report from the consultants. That draft report will be forwarded to the local planning agency for review for February 11th. We then intend to bring the draft report to City Council on February 17th and again on March 2nd. At each of those meetings, public comment will be taken as well. So we want to make sure that every opportunity is provided for you all to participate. We also would like to make sure that you take the opportunity to sign in the sign-in sheet. We are keeping a record this evening to participate that way as well. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our consultant, Dr. Margaret Banyan with Florida Gulf Coast University.
So I also want to introduce the other members of the team that's been working very hard on the evaluation and appraisal report. So over here, I'm not going to introduce everybody individually. You'll meet them later on tonight. So we've got members of Insight and Waldrop Engineering and FGCU. So everybody on that team, Antoine, you're also with okay. They're part of the team that's been working very hard on this. So I really want to thank everybody for all the work that's gone in. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to just give a brief overview of the EAR process for those of you who have not attended a meeting before. And then I'm going to share some of the results from the survey. There was quite a few, for those of you who took the survey, there was quite a few questions. So we didn't put every single question on the presentation here tonight, but that will be part of the final report. So you'll be able to have a chance to review those results as well. Just to get started, the agenda, I've listed it here. What we'll do is we'll do a presentation. Following that, we have posters around the room. And these posters are kind of some questions to elicit some additional feedback from you about what you think is important in the comprehensive plan. And some of them are a little bit more follow-up from the survey questions, things that we think we'd like to hear a little bit more detail on. And that'll be our community discussion, and then we'll wrap up, and we've got a list of the meetings that Arlene mentioned at the end of this presentation. So the evaluation and appraisal report, what this is a state mandated process. Every 7 years, typically cities and counties go through this process to evaluate their comprehensive plans. So we call it for short the EAR, but the EAR process in Bonita Springs was done in 2005, 2006. The state changed some of their requirements, and then they pushed back some of the comprehensive plans. So the last time Bonita Springs went through this process was nearly 10 years ago now. So every 7 years, though, typically that's the rotation schedule. So the purpose is to look at changes in the comprehensive plan that are based on when the state changes its legislation. It also requires some changes to your comprehensive plan. That's the main purpose. Then the review of the progress that has been made since you last had your EAR. What has the city done? What has it accomplished? And then recommendations for amendments to the comprehensive plan based on those things. So the process for us has been to look at the state legislation, see what's changed, respond to any changing conditions and trends. So you've had some population growth, you've had some annexations. Those things require some reflection in the comprehensive plan. Also evaluate the comprehensive plan to see if it's still compliant with your vision, to assess any shortcomings of the plan, and to assess to what degree the plan has achieved its objectives. So that's the process that we go through. And here's the timeline if you kind of look at this slide. This part of the process, we are not making any changes to the comprehensive plan in this process here today. Our job is solely to evaluate the plan and to look at some recommendations based on those things I just mentioned. This part of the process is due April 1 of 2016 to the state. So we've had kind of shortened timeline because we do have the state requiring it to be submitted by April 1st. Following that, the second step of the process would be to actually make any necessary changes or amendments to the comprehensive plan. You have a year to do that, and that would be the actual changes to and the actual amendments at that point. And then finally, if there's any follow-on changes to the land development code, they would be made following that point. So as you can see, it's kind of an extended timeline. And again, the recommendations we're making are not going to change the comprehensive plan. That's up to your council and it's up to your LPA to make recommendations and to forward those things as policy. So I want to just kind of briefly highlight or show you your various elements in your comprehensive plan. There's quite a few, and we're evaluating all of those elements. So you can see future land use, transportation, conservation and coastal management. Those are some of the elements that are pretty significant for you. All right, so again, tonight what you'll do is you're going to visit the posters around the room. You're going to provide us with some feedback. We hope that you're going to have a conversation. We hope you'll have a conversation with each other. We hope you'll have a conversation with the people who are working on the report, and they raised their hands already. So they'll be stationed around the room, and all we want you to do is look at the question and use the smelly markers. Smelly markers make everybody happy. Use the smelly markers to make your comments. And the pages are double-sided, so flip it over if there's not enough room. We also have extra sheets of paper. If there's something that you feel like is important for you to add, please do that. So again, we're still taking public comment. So when you talk to each other, there's quite a few people here tonight, so listen to each other. Be brief and concise, but don't leave anything out. I'm not sure how much of a challenge that's going to be. Don't leave anything out, but be brief. So be patient and cooperative. So we really are trying to kind of do a lot to elicit your feedback here tonight. So just to share with you, this process didn't start just like the comprehensive plan didn't start without some context. So we started this process with some context. And one of the first things we did is said, what has the city been doing in terms of visioning? What has it been doing? And so we developed a bit of a framework from which to kind of start to elicit feedback. And that framework was the 2014 strategic priorities by the city. So those 4 things were quality of life, revitalizing the downtown, strengthening the infrastructure, and working on economic development. So that was the framework that we began with. And then we started to look at some of the changing conditions, what's changed, what's happened, what are the trends. And the first thing is the population projection. That's always pretty important. So the permanent population is now projected to be 46,838. If you were here at the previous presentations, that number has slightly changed. And the reason why is because we get the projections from an organization called Beaver, which is the Bureau of Economic and Business Research, and they're the gold standard for population projections in the state. So Beaver occasionally changes and updates their population projections. This number is off by a couple hundred from the last presentation because they just updated their projections. So they have also updated their 2040 projections, and in 2040 they estimate that the population will be at 69,669. And when you look at all of their analysis, the fastest growing group is people in the 75 and over age range. Now, we've talked about this before in some of the other meetings I've been in. Some people say, really, how could that be? Well, those are baby boomers. 25 years from now, baby boomers will be 75 years of age and older. So it makes sense that that's where the fastest growing group is, and that's currently what's trending for Bonita Springs. Those are important things for us to consider as we look at anything in your comprehensive plan. How is that going to impact walkability? How is that going to impact people's interest in driving? How is that going to impact where people want to live? So those kind of frameworks, that's sort of what we've been doing to kind of look at the comprehensive plan in terms of trends. So what we mean by quality of life. Quality of life, we mean things like strong neighborhoods, land use, a green city, which has been important to the city of Bonita Springs, environmental protection, housing. Those are some quality of life kinds of issues and things that we're thinking about and ties to quality of life. Revitalizing downtown, some of the things that we would like to look at is what are your priorities for developing the downtown? What does your housing look like in downtown? Is it mixed use? What kind of housing products do you think people are looking for? And then what kind of density do you think is important for downtown? All right, strengthening the infrastructure. What we mean by that is what is your transportation infrastructure? What should that look like? What attention and focus should that get? What about water? What about water and sewer? Drinkable water, stormwater? What should we be hearing about in terms of parks and recreation and emergency evacuation in schools? And then in terms of economic development, there's always some kind of a land use consideration for economic development as well. A lot of these things overlap. So things that are impacting economic development are also impacting your quality of life. So teasing these things apart has been a challenge, and that's kind of why we use this framework. In terms of economic development, what kind of industry and commerce is important for the city? What's your employment situation look like? Who do you want to attract? And then what should your corridors do to also embrace your quality of life and to attract businesses that you want? So that's kind of how we use the strategic priorities to frame your issues. So I'm going to turn to the survey results. And again, you're going to have a copy of all these. So these questions don't necessarily go in order in this presentation. But in terms of the survey, we had it open for 2 months, September 30th to November 30th. We wanted to keep it open for as long as possible. We know that not everybody's here in September, so an online survey was perfect to be able to try to get as much input as we can from other places. We got 334 responses, which is a pretty good survey response rate. There was 209 homeowners or renters that participated in the survey, and then 111 business owners or employees. So we got a pretty decent perspective on what people who live or work in the city, sort of what they're thinking as well. So the first question that I want to share with you is one of the first questions that we asked is as the city grows, what are the growth related concerns? The biggest concern was traffic congestion. That's not a big surprise. In fact, I don't think any of these questions and their responses are going to be a surprise to anybody. I think it's something that you already are very familiar with. So the biggest response was traffic congestion, and then the next response was the impact on the natural environment. And then the third ranked concern was the cost of housing. I'm not going to explain all this to you. You can look at the chart and see how things sort of fell out. So this was a ranking question. We're asking people what they were most concerned about. The next question I want to share is what strategy should we be thinking about in terms of promoting quality of life? And we wanted to target and ask about walkability because that's something that we've heard a lot about and we wanted to ask about. And so the question was, what's one strategy for quality of life of residents is to increase the ability to walk and bike. So tell us how best to do that. So for most people, biking and walking facilities, the provision of biking and walking facilities was most important. There's other things, of course, that help with biking and walking, like neighborhood connectivity, but clearly, as people ranked this priority, they wanted more facilities to bike and walk. So more sidewalks, more shared use paths, more bike lanes. Those are the kinds of facilities that we would be talking about. Next question is, what's the biggest barrier to promoting biking and walking? And I wasn't real surprised that safety is the biggest barrier, and that was the biggest barrier by a lot. You can see on the response that that was very significant for most people. Safety is the most important issue. And the next most important issue is that destinations are not close enough together, but safety by far outweighed most other considerations. So then we asked, as the city grows, what's the most important action that the city could take in terms of housing? And there was almost a tie. It was very, very close, but just slightly the winner was preventing neighborhood degradation caused by aging, vacant, or abandoned properties, and that was almost equally tied with providing housing for young professionals. So those are clearly the two most significant issues in terms of housing. Other things are important, but those were quite important to lots of the respondents to the survey. And then we asked about wildlife and protection of wildlife. What was the most important strategy to protect wildlife? And that was protection of wildlife habitat. So you can see we also asked about wildlife corridors. That was important as well, but habitat ended up being kind of the most important strategy for the respondents. And then we also asked about addressing water conservation. And the responses here were fairly equal. There's a lot more evenness to the responses here. Enhancing the quality of groundwater, encouraging water conservation, and wastewater reuse. That was the most popular kind of strategy, but not by a lot. You can see that they were fairly equal. One of the questions then we asked is we wanted to turn it downtown and talk and ask a little bit about downtown. So one of the questions we asked was if we were able to deal with urban sprawl by increasing density in downtown, would people support that? And quite a few people said they would support increasing density in downtown under those conditions. Okay. You began to build in the city, so that's not too surprising, but it was kind of neat to see that. And then kind of what sources of communication are best for people. It looks like email is the best source of communication in terms of attracting people downtown. And again, these are kind of fun questions. During the long survey, it's kind of nice to ask a fun question that you say, oh, there I get a little bit of a reward for going through this survey. And then newspaper announcements and Facebook also were fairly popular in terms of communicating with people. Then I was very interested to see the response to this question. We asked about if people would consider living downtown, and it was almost equally yes and no. The yeses slightly won out, so we went a little deeper and we wanted to see who was saying yes and who was saying no. So for those of you who took the survey, we asked birth year. And birth year is a way for us to look at a generational analysis. And you can see on the bottom, in terms of the generations, it was baby boomers and millennials who more often said yes, that they would be interested in living downtown, that they would. Those two generations are not a surprise either. And Generation X, what's happening with Generation X right now? Those are the people that are right now, they're having children. So in terms of right now, where that generation would live is typically a single family home because they're having children. But baby boomers are moving into retirement and millennials are coming into the workforce. So it makes a lot of sense that those two groups would be pretty interested in living downtown. All right, and then we also asked about if they would live downtown, kind of what kind of housing products would they like to see. Townhomes were popular, condominiums and live-work units, so mixed-use kind of live-work units were popular. Yeah, I don't have, at the top of my head, the silent generation is prior to the baby boomers. I don't remember exactly what year the cutoff is, but it's just prior. That's what the... Yes, up in years, usually.
That's from 75 and over.
Yes, right. Okay. So we also wanted to ask businesses about if they would be interested in locating downtown. So yes, if they did own a business, it did look like there was some majority that said that they would be interested in locating downtown. Of course, not everyone who took the survey was a business owner. So you see on there, on that chart, I don't own a business. I'm almost done. Are you still interested? Have I lost you yet? No? Okay. All right, so then we asked about how economic development should be fostered, what kind of strategies would be more important. And we looked at the top one, it says encourage development of a higher quality workforce. There was a lot of people who thought that was a pretty important strategy, followed by providing incentives to attract and retain businesses. But it was really the people that ended up being more important to the survey respondents. And what I mean by people is developing the people and the professionals to work here in the city, that was a important strategy. Okay, number 18, what type of businesses and or industry would you like to see in the city? High technology or technology was preferred. Again, not a huge surprise. Tourist related was also popular, and then cottage industries, arts industries were also fairly popular. So cottage industries really are typically sort of the smaller, small business owner kind of industries. So those were the things people were looking for. And then rank the following types of land use you think the city most needs. And the most popular there was parks and open space and downtown. So downtown was slightly above parks and open space, but those are the two things that, again, it's not a big surprise given Bonita Springs' real emphasis on quality of life, and so that wasn't too surprising that was the areas that people wanted to see most. Mixed use was also popular as well. All right, so then we turn to asking about infrastructure and a level of priority for improving infrastructure in the city. Streets or roads was popular, but also was potable water. And so those were the two that were the most important. Streets or roads was slightly more important as a strategy than potable water. And then we asked about transportation and what priorities we should be looking at in terms of transportation. And the most popular here was improving walking and encouraging road connectivity. Biking was also important, and repairing existing roads was also somewhat important. Again, not a big surprise given your emphasis in your recent work on those kinds of issues. And then we wanted to also ask about the public transit system, and we asked people to sort of fill in the blank kind of question. I would use the public transit system if. There was plenty of people who said that they would just not take the public bus. But the other kind of higher response was I would use the public transit system if it was closer to my home, work, or shopping. That's pretty typical of responses across the nation. Most transit users will use it if it's close enough and convenient. So convenience is kind of the key when it comes to transit. All right, and then we wanted to ask, almost done, I promise, there's probably two more. All right, so long-term resilience that results from high tide events, storm surges, those kinds of things. Resilience has become a big issue for the state, so we really wanted to ask residents about what you think about resilience and what the best strategies are for that. And the most popular kind of strategy for resilience was embracing natural systems. So in terms of natural system, it means protecting the bays and the mangroves and things that naturally will help with high tide events or storm surge. Engineering solutions was next, and then followed by policies for development and redevelopment. Oh, that was the last one. Tricked you. You thought there was more. All right, so public input opportunities in the future. So we're having this meeting tonight, open public workshop. We will follow that with the LPA meeting on February 11th at 9 a.m. That will be here. In fact, the rest of the meetings will be here. Then City Council, February 17th, and again, City Council on March 2nd. That is also on a poster that's on the city's website, in case you forget those.
Yes, I live here year-round, and I never saw anything about a survey. Where was the survey? And out of 47,000 people that live here, or 48,000 people live here, 338 seems like such a small number. How did that go? How did this transpire so that only 300 people out of 48,000? We have a survey we do on our little beach down there. We get as many people respond.
Yeah, I sent it to all of the contacts. I sent it to the beach to send out. I sent it to as many contacts as I could to send out on our behalf. And we did press release. We emailed it to homeowner associations that we had addresses for. I ended up with, after the survey, more than 300 people on my list. So we sort of did the best we could to get it out to as many people as possible. So we used as many avenues we could. It was posted on the city's website.
What is the state requirement? What specifically does the state require you to review and recommend to the city council at this point? And what is stuff that isn't required that you're doing?
So I went over it earlier, is that the state absolutely requires that we look at changes in state legislation.
Mm-hmm.
And they also encourage the cities and counties to also do a full review. So the absolute minimum that you have to do, if that's the question that you're asking, is the state review. That's the absolute minimum. But the legislation also says that they would like you to do, the state encourages cities and counties to do a full review. Annexations do have to be recognized. So that's the other piece about what we've done.
I was asking because you're saying that you're limited as far as time. That's why you had to, put the meetings so close together and everything. And I just know that on the record at the April 9th, 2015 local planning agency meeting, that the city attorney and the someone from the planning agency, I think, commented that the reason, one of the reasons they're doing the EAR is so that they can take out some of the traps that they have stuck in there, like height limits and density limits that are in our comp plan that the community put in there in order to create their vision of the community. And one of the reasons they're doing the EAR is to take some of those out that they don't want in there anymore, but that the community still wants in. So I'm just wondering, you know, we don't look at them as traps. We look at them as part of our vision and how to get to our vision and to keep our quality of life. And the planning staff that was at that meeting, April 9th, said that they were doing it to make the comp plan leaner. And I'm not sure that the community wants the comp plan leaner. The goals, objectives, and policies that are in that comp plan are there for a reason. It wasn't because staff came up with them. The whole community came up with them over six sessions, vision sessions, and came up with them. And I don't think 3 meetings, you know, that a lot of the community didn't know about should cause you to make recommendations to City Council to take those goals, objectives, and policies out of that comp plan.
So I appreciate the comments, and I've personally heard that feedback before, and I can't speak for anything that an LPA member, or I can't speak for what anybody else said. When we were asked to do the task as I outlined it, and that's the task that we're doing. It's up to the council and to the public to give us feedback about what they want to see, and we're taking that feedback, and all of that's going into the process. So beyond that, right, and that's our approach. And so, right, and what the council does with the information is really, it's a policy decision. I mean, and so I think that's important to sort of to highlight.
Countywide, there is a list of currently zoned single-family residential lots and multifamily lots. You can get this by contacting Ken Wilkinson, the property appraiser's office, and they will send you at a fee an Excel spreadsheet with everything about these vacant properties. And I would like that list compared, and the purpose of this statement tonight is the potable water issue, our drinking water. I would like to compare all the county's vacant lots and multifamilies to the Lower West Coast Supply Plan in the South Florida Water Management District. Number 1, development in the DRGR that involves approvals or new rezoning is growth and water demand beyond the forecast shown. I'm nervous tonight. They have not done a build-out water supply demand analysis for the countywide build-out number of roughly 1.4 million, whereas our water supply is finite. So before we go any further, how much water do we have?
First, I support the comments that I've heard from the audience also, and I want to thank you for your work on this. I also had a serious concern about the response rate on the survey. So we're talking about really less than 1% of the city's residents have responded, and I'm one of those people who would have responded had I known about it. I think there was about a 2-month window, if I'm not mistaken, for survey responses, which is a very limited amount of time, and I'm very concerned that we really are talking only about less than 1% of the city's residents who responded to the surveys. I noticed on the posters over here for public comment that one of the questions is in regard to suggestions for questions to ask on a survey, and I'm wondering if there is going to be a subsequent survey, if that's the intention of that poster.
So perhaps there was a typo on that poster. I don't think so, but the poster is asking, are there other things that you would have said are there other things we haven't considered? That's the intent of that feedback on that poster. And let me just respond generally to the survey. It's a survey, right? You don't get a lot of detailed information from a survey. So we've been out and we've also been talking to people. We've talked individually to council, we've talked to candidates, we've talked to lots of different groups. So we've looked at all your documents, we've looked at newspaper articles, we've paid attention to the comments that you've made in meetings. So the survey, I know it's easy to kind of focus in on a survey. We treat it as another option for input, and we don't treat it as gospel. So I'm not real worried about it not being representative, because I think if you look at the responses, and everyone I've talked to, pretty much there's a lot of agreement that biking and walking is important, that environmental protection is important. So I'm not real hung up on sort of the details about that survey. And that's just to be fair.
You pretty much extrapolate from what you got there and to a larger group. That's a focus, all right? And that's what I think you're trying to say. What you know, the survey, you can send out hundreds of surveys and you don't get the return. But you did get a good cross-section of where people and what they're looking at. And I think the people in here, as they make comments, they will also concur with where the need is.
Right, and that's the purpose of tonight as well. So for anybody that missed the survey, please write additional comments on this poster.